My name is Maria Whitmore, and I'm 27 years old. I don't think of myself as extraordinary. I'm not the woman who floods social media with glamorous outfits or exotic trips. I'm not the kind of person who fills a room with dramatic stories or sparkling charm. I'm steady, predictable, maybe. The kind of person who shows up even when I'm tired, especially when I'm tired. And for a long time, I thought that was enough. For more than 2 years, I was with a man named Charles. He was magnetic in ways I wasn't handsome, social, the life of every gathering. People noticed him when he walked into a room. Me, I blended into the background, quietly making sure things ran smoothly. I didn't mind. That balance felt comforting, until the day I realized it had been slowly eroding me. When we first started dating, Charles was still piecing his life together. He was finishing his degree, bouncing between 2 part-time jobs, always exhausted, always anxious about money. I remember how frazzled he looked the first time I visited his apartment, stacks of unopened bills, a half-broken lamp textbook scattered like confetti. He laughed it off, saying, "Welcome to my empire," but I could see the weight pressing down on him. And so without really thinking, I stepped in. When his car broke down, I drove him to work every day for a month until he saved enough for repairs. When rent deadlines loomed, I quietly covered the gaps with my own paycheck. I worked extra hours sometimes, picking up double shifts when he caught the flu last winter and missed weeks of work. I told myself it wasn't sacrifice, it was partnership. You carry the weight when the other person can't. Isn't that what love is supposed to be? I never kept score, at least not consciously. I didn't think about how many times I paid for our dates or how often I rearranged my schedule to accommodate his. I didn't dwell on the fact that he almost never offered to do the same for me. I told myself that someday when he was more stable, it would even out. And to be fair, Charles wasn't cruel, not in the obvious ways. He could be affectionate, funny, playful. He had this way of making me laugh when I was dead tired, collapsing onto the couch after a 12-hour shift. He'd throw a pillow at me and say, "Don't pass out yet. You haven't told me about your day." And for a moment, it felt like I mattered just as much as he did. But then there were the comments, the little ones that slid under my skin and stayed there. "Maria, you're just so predictable sometimes. Don't you ever want to do something wild?" Or, "Not everything has to be about saving money. Live a little." He'd say it with a laugh sometimes, with an arm slung around me, and I'd brush it off. I told myself he didn't mean anything by it, that he was just venting or comparing us to the exaggerated couples on Instagram reels he scrolled through at night. But in the quiet spaces of my mind, a question began to grow. Was I not enough for him? Those doubts multiplied slowly, like water seeping through cracks you don't notice until the foundation shifts. And then one night the cracks gave way. It was a Friday. I had worked a long shift, but Charles was excited. His old college friends were in town, and he wanted me to come with him to dinner. The restaurant was one of those trendy places downtown, the kind with loud music, overpriced cocktails, and tiny appetizers stacked like art. The second we walked in, Charles came alive. He greeted his friends like a celebrity returning to his fan base, clapping shoulders, laughing loud, ordering drinks before we'd even sat down. I stayed beside him, smiling, nodding, sipping water, while the others ordered cocktails with names I couldn't pronounce. I didn't mind being in the background. That was my role. Support. Balance. I wasn't there to outshine him. I was there because he wanted me by his side. That's what I told myself as I laughed politely at their inside jokes and listened to stories about professors I'd never met. But as the drinks kept flowing, the conversation turned. One of his friends, a girl with bright red nails and a mischievous smile, leaned in and asked, "So, Charles, what's it like being tied down for so long? Don't you ever feel like you're missing out?" The table chuckled. Charles smirked. He tilted his glass, looked at me, and said the words that would replay in my head like a broken record. "Honestly, dating Maria feels like settling for leftovers. She's reliable, sure, but not exactly the first choice. Still better than being alone, right?" At first, I thought I misheard him. The music, the chatter, it must have drowned out part of the sentence. But then the table fell silent. His friends exchanged uneasy glances. Someone gave a nervous laugh, hoping it was a joke. But Charles shrugged, grinning, as if he'd just delivered a clever punchline. I sat there, my heart pounding against my ribs, heat crawling up my neck. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even move, except to lift my glass of water and take a slow sip. My hands were steady, though my entire body trembled inside. The conversation stumbled forward awkwardly after that people trying to smooth over the crack Charles had torn open, but the words had already carved themselves into me. Settling for leftovers. In that moment, something shifted. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I simply waited until the check came. When it did, I pulled out my card, covered the bill, including his cocktails, and stood. Charles blinked up at me, confused. Maria, where are you going? Home, I said, calm, almost gentle, and then I walked out into the night air. The city buzzed around me, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement. Each step away from that restaurant felt like peeling off a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. By the time I reached my car, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being leftovers. The night air wrapped around me like a cold embrace. For once, I welcomed it. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I walked quickly, not looking back. I could still hear faint echoes of laughter and clinking glasses spilling from the restaurant, but they felt like they belonged to another world, one I had just stepped out of. My phone buzzed in my purse. Once, twice, then, continuously. Charles. I didn't answer. For 2 years, I had answered every call, every text, every half-panicked midnight rant about his boss or his car or his future. But tonight, I let it ring. By the time I reached my car, my heart was no longer racing. It had settled into something different, something steady. A strange calm washed over me, as if my body knew, before my mind did, I was crossing a line I wouldn't step back from. Still, the images replayed in my head like a cruel film reel. Charles's grin. The way he swirled his glass casual, like the words settling for leftovers meant nothing. The flicker of pity in his friend's eyes as they glanced at me. The silence that stretched a fraction too long before someone forced a laugh to ease the tension. I gripped the steering wheel and closed my eyes for a moment. The word leftovers echoed. Not said in anger, not blurted out in a fight. No Charles had spoken it like a fun fact about his life, as though reducing me to scraps was some clever observation he thought would impress his friends. The worst part wasn't even the insult itself. It was the confirmation. The creeping suspicion I had ignored for months had just been voiced aloud in front of witnesses. I started the car. Halfway home, my phone lit up again on the passenger seat. Text after text scrolled across the screen. Maria, seriously, you just left. That was so dramatic. It was a joke, babe. Stop acting like a child. Babe. The word felt dirty now, like it belonged to someone else, not me. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I parked and sat in silence, staring at the dark windows of my building. The exhaustion hit all at once, not just from the long shift I had worked that day, but from years of carrying a weight Charles had never noticed. By the time I dragged myself upstairs and closed my door behind me, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could collapse into bed and let the night dissolve into nothingness. But the knock came less than an hour later. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Charles stood there still in his crisp shirt, the smell of cologne mixed with whiskey clinging to him. His arms were crossed, jaw tight, like he was the one wronged. Really, he said, pushing past me without waiting for permission. You're going to storm off like that and embarrass me in front of my friends. I closed the door slowly, my back straightening. Embarrass you? My voice was even but sharper than I expected. You called me leftovers, Charles. He rolled his eyes like a teenager caught lying. Oh my God, it was a joke. Everyone was laughing. I shook my head. No, they weren't. They were uncomfortable because you exposed exactly how you see me. For the first time that night, Charles faltered. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked by irritation. So what? You're going to throw away 2 years because of one dumb comment after a couple drinks. Grow up, Maria. A bitter laugh escaped me, though it wasn't angry, just tired. Bone-deep tired. You don't accidentally call someone you love leftovers. Drunk or sober jokes are just truths people don't want to admit outright. You meant it. You're twisting this. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. You always do this. You blow everything out of proportion. My arms folded across my chest. No, Charles. What I did was let you belittle me more times than I should have. This time I believe you. You see me as second best, as convenient, and I'm done being convenient. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with disbelief. Charles stared at me as though waiting for me to take it back to soften like I always had. When I didn't, his bravado cracked. Wait, you're actually serious? You'd end us over this. His voice had gone thin, almost boyish. I met his eyes evenly. You ended us the moment those words left your mouth. For once, he had no comeback. His mouth opened, then closed again. He stood there, the weight of reality finally sinking in. I walked to the door, pulled it open, and gestured toward the hallway. Good night, Charles. He lingered for a moment, jaw-clenched fists curling at his sides. Then he muttered, Fine. Whatever. You'll regret this. And just like that, he was gone. When the door clicked shut behind him, the silence that filled the apartment was heavier than I expected. But beneath the heaviness, there was something else. Relief. I leaned against the door and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. The weight of every unpaid bill, every sarcastic jab, every quiet compromise lifted piece by piece. And yet I knew this wasn't the end. Because men like Charles don't just let go. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming across my apartment floor, the kind of gentle warmth that usually promised a calm day. But calm was the last thing I felt. My phone was still buzzing from the night before missed calls, a chain of texts from Charles that stretched like an endless scroll. Maria, you're overreacting. It was one stupid comment. I can't believe you just walked out. After everything I've done for you. That last message made me laugh, though it came out more like a bitter choke. Everything he'd done for me. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't answer. I didn't even type a draft. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the table and walked into the kitchen. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, like each motion was a quiet rebellion. I had spent so long rushing to Charles's needs, rearranging myself around his moods, that the act of ignoring him felt almost radical. Still beneath the stubborn silence, doubt clawed at me. My mind whispered, was I too harsh? Should I have stayed and talked it through? Was it really worth ending over one comment? I pressed my palms against the counter until my knuckles whitened. This was what he always did, twist things until I doubted myself. That evening, I went for a walk through the park, hoping the cool air would clear my thoughts. Families sat on benches, children squealed near the fountain. Joggers passed with steady rhythm. Life went on completely indifferent to the war inside me. And then, as if summoned by my unease, Charles's voice cut through the evening. Maria. I turned. He was jogging toward me. His hair tousled his shirt, wrinkled like he hadn't slept. He slowed when he reached me, hands on his hips, catching his breath. I've been trying to reach you all day. His tone was half frustrated, half pleading. I saw. My voice was flat. He frowned, searching my face for cracks. So you're just going to ignore me now, after 2 years. I'm not ignoring you. I'm choosing not to engage. His jaw tightened. Maria, come on. You know I didn't mean it. It was a joke. Everyone jokes around like that. Everyone, I raised a brow. Do you know what I saw at that table, Charles? Not laughter. Pity. They pitied me, because you made it clear I was just filler. Something to tide you over until something better came along. He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering. You're twisting it. No, I'm finally untwisting it, I said, my voice steady. For years, I excused every little jab, every remark about me being boring or too cautious. But last night, you showed me exactly what you think of me, and I believed you. Silence hung between us. I could see the panic flickering in his eyes, the fear of losing the safety net he had always assumed would be there. So that's it, you're throwing this away. Everything we've built. His voice cracked on the last word, though. I couldn't tell if it was real emotion or performance. I let out a long breath. Charles, what did we build? I carried us. I carried you. And the second you were comfortable, you made it clear that wasn't enough. I won't carry you anymore. He stepped closer, lowering his voice as though proximity would soften my stance. You'll regret this. You think being alone is better? You'll come crawling back. I held his gaze unflinching. I won't, because I'd rather be alone than treated like leftovers. His face twisted, part anger, part disbelief. For the first time since I'd known him, he had no words sharp enough to pierce me. He turned abruptly, muttering under his breath, and walked away. I stood there, heart hammering, but rooted in a strange new certainty. That night, for the first time in months, I slept deeply. No phone buzzing on the nightstand, no waiting for Charles to stumble home late, no bracing for a careless remark. Just silence. But silence has weight. The first week was the hardest. Not because I missed him. I didn't not, really. What I missed was the noise. The constant stream of texts, memes, plans, complaints. My days felt too quiet, my evenings too still. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone out of habit, expecting a notification, only to find the screen blank. At work, people noticed the shift. Rough week, a coworker asked, as I stared at my computer longer than necessary. I just smiled faintly and said I was fine. By the second week, the silence began to feel different. Less like absence, more like space. I filled it with things I had neglected: long workouts at the gym, dinners with friends I hadn't seen in months, evenings with books I'd abandoned halfway through. Piece by piece, I reclaimed the parts of myself I had tucked away to make room for Charles. Then one afternoon, while scrolling idly through my phone, I saw a photo of Charles with someone new. They were clinking glasses, his arm slung around a woman I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Finally getting the treatment I deserve." For a moment, my chest tightened. A flare of anger, of hurt. 2 weeks. That's all it took for him to replace me. But then just as quickly, the ache dissolved into something else. Confirmation. Proof that every word he had spoken that night was true. I had been the leftovers. She was the main course. Or so she thought. I set the phone down. No tears came. No spiral of rage. Just quiet acceptance. Because deep down I knew something Charles hadn't realized yet: karma never loses an address. By the third week after the breakup, I noticed something odd in the mirror. My face looked different. Not prettier, not younger, but lighter. As though someone had erased the permanent crease between my brows. A coworker even commented one morning, "Maria, whatever you're doing, keep it up. You look like you've been on vacation." I smiled politely, not bothering to explain. Because the truth was, my so-called glow wasn't the result of rest. It was the result of absence. The absence of constantly putting out Charles's fires, soothing his insecurities, bending myself into shapes that didn't fit. For the first time in years, my life belonged to me. I started small. After work, instead of racing home to make sure Charles was fed or entertained, I stopped by the gym. At first I thought I'd feel awkward, but the rhythm of movement, the beat of my own breath, it was intoxicating. I left each session flushed, exhausted, but alive in a way I hadn't felt in ages. I reconnected with friends I had let drift away. Dinner with Hannah turned into laughter that spilled long past dessert. Drinks with Jess ended with us dancing in her living room to old songs we hadn't played since college. With every gathering, I realized just how isolated I'd been, how much of my world had revolved around Charles. The silence at home no longer felt heavy. It felt spacious. I filled it with music, with the hum of the oven, as I taught myself new recipes with the gentle rustle of book pages late into the night. Meanwhile, Charles's world was anything but quiet. Mutual friends, those who still orbited him, began to drop stories like breadcrumbs. At first I ignored them, but curiosity has a way of creeping in. Apparently, his perfect new girlfriend was not living the dream she posted on Instagram. She had fallen hard for Charles's charm, the same effortless charisma that had drawn me in years ago. To outsiders, they looked electric together. But behind closed doors, the cracks were already showing. He left her waiting at restaurants, sometimes never showing at all. He canceled plans last minute with flimsy excuses. He flirted openly with other women at bars, even when she was right there beside him. One night, a mutual acquaintance told me, "It's wild, Maria. He treats her exactly the way he used to fear being treated, like she's disposable." I remember tilting my glass, watching the reflection of light ripple across the surface of my drink. I didn't respond, because what was there to say? Karma was already doing the talking. But if I'm honest, there were moments when the old ache tugged at me. I would see a photo of them smiling, clinking glasses, and that ugly little voice would whisper, "Maybe you really were the problem. Maybe you weren't exciting enough." That voice always faded, though, when the next story reached me. Like how she showed up to a party alone because Charles had forgotten to pick her up. Or how she posted a cryptic story about learning people's true colors. Or how she complained to friends that he was distant, dismissive, sometimes cruel. I knew that version of Charles too well, and now someone else was learning it firsthand. Still, I refused to linger on his unraveling. Every time someone tried to update me, I nodded politely, but changed the subject. Because dwelling on his downfall, tempting as it was, felt like handing him more of my energy, and I had spent enough of my life giving him that. Instead, I focused on building. One evening, I found myself standing in the middle of my apartment, a paintbrush in hand. The walls had been the same dull beige for years, because Charles had always insisted redecorating was a waste of money. Now, with music blasting, I painted them a warm shade of sage. By the time I finished, flecks of paint dotted my arms and hair, and I laughed out loud, really laughed for the first time in months. It wasn't just the walls that felt new, it was me. But as much as I tried to keep my focus inward, Charles had other plans. He started reaching out again. First, it was a casual text. "Hey, just wondering how you've been." I didn't answer. A few days later, Maria ignoring me isn't fair. We were together for years. We should at least talk. Still silence from me. Then came the photos. One evening, I opened Instagram and saw a notification Charles had tagged me in a throwback picture of us at a concert, his caption dripping with nostalgia, "Some nights can't be replaced." I untagged myself instantly, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. He had someone new, yet he was still pulling me back into his narrative. When that didn't work, the messages turned sharper. "So this is it. You're just going to erase me like I was nothing. Don't act like you're better than me, Maria. No one will love you like I did." I stared at the words, my pulse hammering. For a moment, the old fear flickered, fear of confrontation, fear of being cornered. But then clarity settled. He was unraveling, and I didn't need to pick up the pieces this time. That night, I blocked his number. I thought that would be the end of it. But Charles was never good at letting go of comfort. And soon enough, his desperation would find new ways to knock on my door. 6 weeks after that night at the restaurant, I thought the worst was behind me. I'd painted my walls, rebuilt my routines, and even learned to enjoy the silence that used to haunt me. But silence doesn't stay empty for long. Sometimes it gets filled with things you never invited back in. It started with a text from a number I knew by heart. "Maria, hey, can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. The message was short, almost careful. Not Charles's usual style. I didn't respond. The next day, another came through. "Wow, you're really going to ignore me after everything I just wanted to clear the air." I placed my phone face down on the counter and went back to cooking dinner. The old Maria would have caved immediately, fingers flying across the keyboard to smooth things over to make sure he wasn't spiraling. But that Maria no longer lived here. 3 days passed. Then his tone shifted. "Okay, I get it. I messed up. That leftovers comment. It was stupid. I was tipsy and trying to make people laugh. You know I didn't mean it like that." This time I actually chuckled. The audacity of packaging cruelty as a bad stand-up routine. That night my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Finally, Charles said, relief spilling into his voice. "You're impossible to reach these days." "Maybe that's the point," I replied, my voice calm. He sighed dramatically. "Come on, don't be like that. Look, I know I hurt you. But are you really going to erase 2 years together over one dumb comment? You didn't just hurt me, Charles." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "You showed me exactly what I was to you." "It was a bad joke," he insisted, his tone sharpening. "I was drunk. You're blowing it out of proportion." "No," I said firmly. "I believed you that night because deep down I think you meant every word. That's why I walked away." Silence stretched on the line. For a moment I could hear nothing but his breath uneven, as if he hadn't expected me to stand this firm. Then his voice softened. "I miss us. You were always there for me no matter what. No one else has ever treated me like you did. Can't we just start over?" I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "No, Charles. I'm not interested in being leftovers again." There was a pause. Then, like a switch flipping, the sweetness evaporated. "Wow," he snapped. "So that's it. You're just throwing everything away, after all I gave you." I almost laughed, though my chest ached. "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm finally keeping something for myself." Before he could respond, I ended the call. Over the next week, the flood began. Texts, voicemails, even emails, when he realized he was blocked on most platforms. Each message carried a different mask. First came the lighthearted ones. "Remember that time we got caught in the rain on vacation? You laughed so hard your mascara ran. I miss that." Then the apologetic. "I know I've been awful. I know I don't deserve you. Please, Maria, just give me one more chance." When that didn't work, the manipulative, "You'll never find someone who understands you like I do. Don't ruin this for both of us." And finally, the angry, "Fine, be stubborn. Don't come crawling back when you realize no one else wants you." I read them all in silence, never replying, never giving him the satisfaction of knowing he had gotten under my skin. But some nights, lying in bed, I'd feel the old tug, the part of me that wanted to soothe, to fix, to believe he could change. That part had kept me tethered to him for years, but now I let it starve. One Saturday afternoon, I was curled up on the couch with a book when I heard a knock at the door. My stomach dropped. When I opened it, there he was, Charles. But he didn't look like the man who had smirked at that restaurant table. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes rimmed red. He clutched his phone like it was a lifeline. "Can we please talk?" he asked, his voice cracking. For a long moment, I said nothing. The apartment was quiet behind me, warm, safe. His presence felt like a shadow trying to seep back in. Finally, I stepped aside. 5 minutes. He rushed in like he'd just won something, collapsing onto the couch. For a while he didn't speak. He just sat there staring at the floor until the tears came. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so, so sorry. I never should have said that. You didn't deserve it. You were the only person who ever really cared about me." I stayed standing, my arms folded. "Charles, crying doesn't change what you said, or how you felt when you said it." He wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie. "You don't understand. The girl I was seeing, she didn't care about me at all. She just wanted someone to show off. She cheated on me after a month." I let the silence stretch. He stared up at me, waiting for comfort, for forgiveness, for me to slip back into the role of caretaker. But I didn't move. Finally, I asked quietly, "And you think that means I should take you back?" His head snapped up, his eyes wide, desperate. "I'm saying I made a mistake. You're stable, you're kind. You're the only one who ever—" "Stop!" My voice cut through, steady as steel. "You don't miss me. You miss the way I made your life easier." He blinked at me, stunned. "That's not true." "It is," I said firmly. "You called me leftovers. And the second you thought you had something better, you dropped me. Now that it blew up in your face, you want to come back. That's not love, Charles. That's convenience." His face twisted, desperation melting into anger. "You think you're better than me now just because you've been hitting the gym and ignoring my calls. Don't flatter yourself. You'll never find someone who puts up with you like I did." I almost laughed. "Put up with me, Charles. I carried you. And now I'm done." He shot up from the couch, his tears gone, replaced with fury. "Fine. Screw you. You'll regret this. Don't come crawling back when you realize no one else wants you." I opened the door, my expression calm. "Goodbye, Charles." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. But all I felt was calm. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one left standing in the ruins. He was. It didn't end with slammed doors. People like Charles never let endings stay clean. For a few weeks there was quiet. A deceptive calm. I almost believed he'd finally accepted it, that he had moved on, found another distraction, or simply run out of energy to chase me. But one evening, I came home to find a single note slipped under my door. "Maria, I know you hate me, but please, I just need to talk one last time. I can't sleep. I can't think. Please, don't shut me out forever." My chest tightened as I read it, but I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. I had already given him his last time. 2 nights later, the knocking started. First tentative, then louder, until it rattled my doorframe. I froze on the couch, heart pounding, praying he would give up. But his voice came through the wood. "Maria, I know you're in there. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I debated calling the police, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the flicker of fear in his voice. Maybe it was the thought that if I didn't face him now, he'd keep coming back. With a deep breath, I opened the door. Charles stood there, disheveled eyes rimmed with exhaustion. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Please," he whispered, "just let me explain." Against every instinct, I stepped aside. He stumbled in, clutching his phone like it was the last anchor to his sanity. The moment he sat down, his facade crumbled. His hands trembled, his voice cracked. "I messed everything up. The girl I left you for, she used me. She never cared. She cheated, she humiliated me. And the whole time, all I could think about was you. How you were steady, kind, safe. You were the only real thing I ever had." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I didn't move closer. "Charles, do you hear yourself? You're not telling me you love me. You're telling me you miss what I gave you. The stability, the safety net." He dragged his hands down his face, frustration mixing with desperation. "Why are you twisting everything? I'm pouring my heart out, and you're acting like I'm some villain. I made one mistake, one stupid comment, and you're punishing me forever." "One mistake," my laugh was sharp, bitter. "Charles, you didn't just slip. That night at the restaurant, you said exactly what you thought of me. And you didn't say it in a fight or in anger. You said it with a smile like it was entertainment." His jaw tightened. I was drunk. Then maybe drunkenness just stripped away the mask. My voice stayed calm but steel-edged each word. Because the truth came out. I was leftovers to you. Convenient. Reliable. Not your first choice. And that truth doesn't disappear just because you regret saying it out loud. His eyes burned wet and furious. "So that's it. You're done. After everything. You really think you'll find someone better than me?" I didn't flinch. "I don't need to find someone better than you, Charles. I just need to stop being with someone who sees me as less." He stood suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. "You're so cold now. You think you've changed, but you're still the same predictable Maria. No one else will put up with you." I stepped closer, not in fear, but in defiance. You keep saying that, but you don't even realize how pathetic it sounds. You didn't put up with me, Charles. I carried you. I made your life easier while you chipped away at mine. And now that I'm gone, you've realized how much harder life is without me. That's not love. That's desperation. For a moment, his expression cracked. The fury slipped, revealing raw panic. He looked like a man dangling over a cliff, fingers slipping. Maria, he whispered, don't do this. Don't leave me like this. I opened the door wide, the hallway light spilling in. My voice was steady, final. I'm not leaving you, Charles. You already left me the moment you decided I wasn't enough. All I'm doing now is refusing to go back. He stood frozen as though hoping I'd change my mind if he just waited long enough. When I didn't, his face hardened one last time. Fine, he spat. You'll regret this. You'll regret throwing me away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just said softly, goodbye, Charles. And then I closed the door. This time I didn't lean against it shaking. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself. Instead, I walked into the center of my apartment, took a deep breath, and felt the silence settle not as a weight, but as peace. For the first time in years, my life was mine, and Charles's chaos. It was finally on the other side of the door where it belonged. A month passed without a word from Charles. No knocks, no notes, no messages slipping through from blocked numbers. At first, I waited for the other shoe to drop for his persistence to flare up again. But as the weeks stretched into silence, I realized something remarkable: he was finally gone. And in his absence, I flourished. The sage-green walls in my apartment gleamed under soft lamplight. My evenings filled with laughter books, workouts, and long conversations with friends I thought I'd lost. I was learning who Maria Whitmore was, without Charles's shadow, and I liked her. So when Hannah invited me to a small get-together one Friday night, I didn't hesitate. A few months ago, I would have made excuses too drained by Charles's moods to socialize. But that night, I slipped into a black dress, tied my hair back, and felt anticipation instead of dread. The apartment buzzed with easy chatter glasses, clinking music low enough for conversation. I laughed with people I hadn't seen in ages, telling stories that had nothing to do with Charles, stories that belonged solely to me. And then I felt it, that unmistakable prickle on the back of my neck. I turned, and there he was, Charles. He was leaning near the kitchen counter, trying to look casual, but his eyes found me instantly. For a split second, I considered leaving, but then a stronger thought pushed through. Why should I? He doesn't own this room. He doesn't own me. I stayed. For the first half hour, he played it cool, laughing too loudly at jokes, acting as though he hadn't seen me. But every few minutes, his eyes darted in my direction. Finally, when the opportunity presented itself, he cornered me by the hallway leading to the kitchen. Hey, he said softly, almost shyly. You look good. I took a slow sip of my drink, unmoved. Thanks. He shifted, clearly thrown by my flat tone. I've been thinking a lot about us, about what we had. I know I screwed up, but maybe we could try again. Start fresh. I just looked at him. He was waiting for me to melt, to reach for his hand to pretend the past could be rewritten. But I felt nothing. Charles said evenly, You made yourself perfectly clear. I was leftovers to you, remember? His face drained of color, like the word had cut deeper now than it ever had before. Around us, the conversation in the room dimmed slightly. A few people had noticed. He opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. My voice stayed calm, steady, but sharp enough to pierce. Now you're the one standing here asking for a second chance after realizing the person you chose didn't want you. So tell me, if I was leftovers, then what does that make you now? The silence that followed was electric. A couple of people near us glanced away awkwardly, pretending not to listen, but the weight of my words hung in the air like smoke. That's not fair, Charles muttered, his bravado crumbling. His voice was quieter now, tinged with shame. You're just being cruel. No, I said. What wasn't fair was me giving you everything I had, only for you to treat me like I was disposable. I'm not leftovers, Charles. I never was. And I refuse to let you reduce me to that again. I set my glass down on a side table and stepped past him. My posture straight, my steps unhurried. The room's chatter gradually resumed around me, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back as I rejoined a circle of friends. And just like that, he was no longer the center of my world, or even the room's. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him standing alone, his glass dangling limply from his hand, his expression hollow. For once, he wasn't the life of the party. He wasn't charming anyone. He was just a man exposed. And for once, it wasn't my problem. Later that night, as I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, a thought struck me with startling clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Charles hadn't given me closure with his apologies or tears or desperate pleas. I had created my own closure the moment I refused to be treated as disposable. I stopped on the sidewalk, inhaled the cool night air, and let it out slowly. The city hummed quietly around me, indifferent. But in that indifference was something beautiful proof that the world kept moving with or without him. For years, I had poured myself into Charles, convinced my worth depended on how much weight I could carry for someone else. But now my worth was my own, untethered, undeniable. And as I slipped my keys into the lock of my apartment, I whispered to myself, not as a vow, but as a reminder. I am not leftovers, I never was. Inside the sage walls gleamed warmly the